Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming this morning to this session. Happy New Year. My name is Krzysztof Pietroszek and I'm a founding director of Ideas Lab. This is a new lab which was created actually theoretically maybe a year ago, but really in the summer, because we used to be just called VR Lab, which is a little bit too limiting name, so I changed it in the summer. Now it's very catchy. It's an expression which encompasses everything we are doing, which is immersive designs, applications, experiences, and stories. This lab is physically inside the game lab. Maybe you heard about the AU Game Lab. I was an interim director last year. Now we have a new senior director, and I started this lab. It's a research lab with faculty coming from different departments. I will talk about it in a second. But first I wanted to tell you what this session will look like. So typically, I give the talk about the amazingness of immersive technologies. And I did it last year at this conference and at many different visiting talks. And this is pretty long and doesn't give you any practical information. So I thought maybe this time we'll do it a little bit differently, since it's a session dedicated to applications for teaching, and we do mainly research, but we apply it a little bit to teaching. And the idea is the following. So I will talk very briefly about the immersive technologies, just to give you an idea what is the current state, what we can do, and kind of a taxonomy of these technologies. And then I will give you examples of projects we are doing across different departments. So you have the idea of broadness of these projects. And then we can discuss whether you have some ideas. You can tell me how would you use the immersive technologies in teaching, instead of me telling you, while I'm only a professor in certain specific department. As a treat at the end, I have a demo on augmented reality glasses called Magic Leap. Whoever wants to stay for the last 15 minutes, we can try it. It was a project we did last year as a research for Peace Corps Museum. So it's kind of fun, and it shows you what is the state of affairs. Okay. So first of all, I wanted to acknowledge everybody in the lab. The lab is growing, so there is a lot of people interested. All these people somehow contribute to the lab. It does not mean they are like under any kind of administrative control of me. I'm just an assistant professor, and these are people who agreed to be affiliated. And this is the coolest thing about it. It's not a center. Anybody can join and live wherever they want. Basically, the idea is that whoever does anything with immersive technologies is and agreed to be affiliated is on this list. That means we are very active and also very minimal in terms of the administration. So I just wanted to introduce some of these people. So this is myself. I'm in a film school, but I have a computer science background, so I do a lot of technology, and I'm also a filmmaker. Baekshare is in CS. She specializes in haptics, which is the perception of touch. She's a perception researcher, so she does a lot of VR experiments with haptics. Arthur Shapiro is a psychologist and computer scientist. He deals with illusions. I don't know if you know him. He's the world's most famous professor of illusions. He wins every illusion contest on the planet for the last 15 years, or every, like really, if you look at the awards, like, oh yeah, art again. So we do some interesting illusion research with him in VR. Maggie Starner is from National Geographic. She's a professor at SOC. We do environmental projects with her in VR. She's a executive director of Center of Environmental Filmmaking. Natalie Yapkovich is the chair of CS department. She does machine learning, but we have a project together with machine learning in VR. Larry Engel is a filmmaker. He does 360 videos, agricultural and environmental videos. He's part of the environmental filmmaking, so he's there too. Braxton Boren is from audio technology. He also does VR. I work with his student. Ben is in communication studies, and he does AR and cities. He's like a civic researcher. And Sharon Weiner just agreed to join us, which I'm very happy with. She's currently at Princeton University, but she's our professor too. And she works in policy regarding the potential of nuclear holocausts, and she did a VR project with that. So these are basically people who deal with VR. I know there is more people who do that. It's just the list which I convinced to join. And if any of you is actually interested, feel free. I would be happy to grow this group as big as possible, and maybe one day turn it into a center if it makes sense. But for now, we want to avoid any administrative overload. So like if there is a center, it has to be millions of dollars of funding first. The mission of the lab is very broadly defined. We don't have a long mission statement because we are so diverse. So we define it as to advance immersive technologies and application in health, education, and entertainment. And as you will see, this is basically the projects which we are working on. So far, the faculty comes from these departments. We now have SIS also. I just didn't add it yet. So it's really varied and interdisciplinary group. So what I mean by advancing immersive technologies? Well, first of all, let's define what we are talking about, because this is actually very confusing. How many of you tried VR before? Almost everybody. Oh, nice. And AR, how about augmented reality? Which is, you might not know the difference. So the AR is supposedly, and in classic definition, is when you add visuals to the reality. So you're not replacing reality. And VR is when you replace reality with new images. But I don't like this classic definition or distinction because it comes from technology. The reason why people say it this way is because for now, and that will change very soon, we have glasses which are dedicated for VR and glasses which are dedicated for AR. That's kind of accidental. The actual terminology which we should use, I hope it will be used because I invented this term, is artificial reality continuum, which is short ARC. The artificial reality itself was a term used by artists in the 1960s regarding the early VR, specifically by Kruger, who was the first to use this. The term virtual reality came in the 1980s and is really misleading. It basically comes from a science fiction novel. There is nothing virtual about virtual reality, so it makes no real sense. The word virtual is kind of weirder. I like the word artificial more because the meaning of the word artificial is that it is created by humans, but it also has the hidden meaning of insincere and potentially dangerous, right? So like artificial intelligence. And we should always think about it, that it's a dangerous technology. So if we think about the artificial reality as a continuum, then we can think about what it really is, like how it differs between VR and AR. So if we take a real environment and we augment it with some holograms, we put some holograms, let's say, in here, as you will see on the demo, there will be a hologram of a Peace Corps volunteer telling story of an artifact he brought from one of the countries. This is called augmented reality. If this hologram starts to interact with the world, so let's say jumps on this table, then goes under the table and I don't see that hologram anymore, that we call mixed reality. So the moment when augmented reality interacts with reality, we call it mixed reality. Then we can actually replace all the visuals in the world, but keep the physicality of the world. So for example, turning this table into a rock, it's still physically there, so we can touch the rock, but it doesn't look like table anymore. That's often called augmented virtuality. And finally, if we completely ignore the reality and go into the virtual world, that's virtual reality. What it means in practice is that if I turn this into a beautiful empty island, and I start to walk in this virtual reality, I will hit the table because there is nothing inside the virtual reality which relates to that physical table. So it's usually done in empty spaces. So it's really a spectrum of technologies, or spectrum of augmentation or degree of augmentation of reality rather than separate bunch of technologies. So that's one thing, but even more importantly, there's another thing which people don't typically think about outside of research yet, which is that artificial reality encompasses all sensory stimuli. It's not only visual and audio. It's not only audio-visual medium. We have technologies for all the other senses. So we have technologies to create sense of touch, for example. This is called haptics. There is a very active research. We can have gloves which allow you to feel that you are touching different grains, and it actually registers very well. We have technologies to stimulate olfaction, so we can have smells, like the famous smellorama in the past, right, which was a failure, if you know what I mean. It was a technology for TV, or for cinema, to create smells. Now the smells are much better created and much more convincing and are very cheap. There is a $300 mask which you can put on your headset, and it generates programmatically different smells. And interestingly, there are other things. For example, the galvanic system, which is our vestibular system which can be affected, which is basically how we feel the feeling of movement, our balance system, can also be stimulated with the VR systems, which allows you to feel that you are moving in VR. So let's say you created an app that you are flying, you are creating the Daedalus dream, but you don't feel that you are really flying. So you could create this sensory stimuli by doing the vestibular system stimulation. So this kind of sensory stimuli encompasses all senses, both in a classical sense and in the broader sense. And we have technologies which can do that. There is even a new technology for stimulating taste. It's called electronic lollipop. So you can basically put it into your mouth and programmatically feel different tastes. It looks very weird for now. It's like really weird, really big. So you're basically putting it in a box and like licking a box. But you can imagine miniaturization of that, which would, for example, help with obesity, because you would feel taste but you wouldn't eat, and so on. There's a lot of potential technology, not to mention the actual immersion. So by artificial reality continuum, I mean not only the spectrum of technologies from augmented to virtual, but also the spectrum of all possible sensory stimuli. In a sense, we can think that the ultimate or holy grail, or maybe not that holy grail, of this technology is to create a sensory stimuli which is indistinguishable from reality. And that's why it is potentially dangerous. And even if you think that this is kind of a science fiction idea, unfortunately, like with many technologies nowadays, it's not, for a reason which is a little bit surprising. So for a long time, for maybe 50 years, we will not be able to create the fidelity of the stimuli which would convince the brain that it's really the reality. But there is recent experiments how to suppress the brain's ability to distinguish between reality and virtual reality. So you can actually physically suppress it just by simply putting a little bit of electric current through the brain safely. I mean, don't do it at home, but it can be done in lab. And that creates this feeling of suppression of inability of distinguishing between virtual reality and reality. It was done experimentally at the University of Southern California. So it's very scary, because you can imagine a matrix world created this way. Okay, so that's the overview of the current state of technologies, but what we can do with it. I will basically go through the projects which we did in the last year and a little bit previous year too at Ideas Lab. Some of them are published, some of them are unfinished, so you'll see research videos, descriptions of projects which are not completely finished, also projects which are done and finished already. I just want to give you like an overview of what we are doing. And I'm going to do it through our website, because I was told that I have to have subtitles, and I don't have them other than YouTube videos. So that's the way to advertise our websites too. So our website is auideaslab.com. Hopefully one day we will be linked from American University, but it takes time to do that. So we are external for now. And we have a number of areas which we are working on. Probably the most active, and that's why I put it first here, is immersive learning. I'm part of the Immersive Learning Network, which is a large international network of researchers interested in immersive learning. So I work very extensively in this area, but we also have other areas. One of them is virtual museum exhibits. So we create virtual museums using augmented reality, and it is delivered to different places. So far we did the Museum for Peace Corps Experiences. Now we are working with the Embassy of Switzerland and other, potentially with the Arabic Emirates too. There is a project. So there is a number of heritage projects which we are working on. Very actively we're researching neuroscience and health sciences applications. We are working with School of Medicine at George Washington University. So far there is nothing I can really show you about it, but the projects there are probably the most the biggest potential for grant bringing in the future. And especially if you're interested in health research, that will be something I would like to discuss with you. Just to give you an example of the project which we are working on right now, we are using holograms for telemedicine. So we're seeing whether there would be a big difference between having a visit with a doctor over video versus visiting your doctor as a hologram. If it makes sense, then maybe this should be a technology which should be used. If it doesn't make any difference, for perceptual difference, then this is not the technology, and we are evaluating that application. We are also building a studio in Game Lab called volumetric capture. This is really cool and unique thing. And it's very expensive, but we are building it from scratch, basically designing it, like creating the software and everything, because otherwise we will need to have a few $1 million to do that. There is only a few studios in the world. Volumetric capture is a new way of recording films. So it's basically an idea of recording 360 film in a different sense, in a sense that you can walk inside that film. And I will show you an example. It's very difficult to show on a 2D screen walking inside the film, but I will still try. There's a promotional video which we have. So it's basically a realization of the idea of holodeck, if you know from Star Trek. The idea that you would be walking and the film is happening there while you are walking around it, and you can become one of the actors. So to do that, you cannot record it as with a regular camera. You have to have a volumetric capture studio, and that's how it usually looks like. This studio would be probably $600,000-700,000. It's the cheapest one. So we are building it at a much lower budget and developing the technology. We also create more traditional VR experiences, which we call virtual presence, using 360 films. And one example I will show you is a film done by one of my students in Venezuela about the refugee crisis. So this traditional VR technology is still valid and useful, and it's sometimes called the ultimate empathy machine, because there was some research showing that if you show people 360 videos as opposed to traditional documentaries, they are much more likely to donate to the organization which is showing it. So it's used by NGOs. And the reasons for that are not really clear. It might be the wow effect, or it might be the effect of the medium, of the immersiveness of the medium. I think it's the immersiveness of the medium, but it's controversial because some people say that it's invasion of this place. Like, for example, there is a famous film from a refugee camp in Syria, which supposedly helped UNICEF to bring to raise money, but it also was criticized for the fact that you can enter this refugee camp in 360 and then leave whenever you want without being affected. But that's how every media works. We also tell traditional volumetric stories. Actually, this is completely not visible. So, sorry, there is a background of the film, but it's too bright here. So these are stories which are used either for news or for regular fiction, and I will show you this example as something which we do with students as an experiential learning. This was probably the most successful experiential learning project I had with students so far. We also work a little bit with sustainable living and cities. For example, we designed a model of New York and how it will be flooded with the future of global warming if we don't stop it. It's very convincing. It was actually even covered by Newsly or some TV. It's very convincing when you actually go to VR and see that you would be in water at a certain time in the future if we don't do something, as opposed to just talking about it. And this is my pet project, which is not really yet happening. I just put it here because I'm trying to get students. If you have any students interested in robotics, that would be awesome. We are 3D printing this robot. It's a life-size robot, and we are going to teach him to do different things. So far, we have a hand. I was even thinking about bringing, it would be kind of fun to bring a robot head. That's it. The rest has to be also printed. There is over 300 parts, and it will take probably 100 days to do that. So it's a lot of work, and we need students. So if you have somehow anybody interested in building robots, that would be great. I think this will be one of the most engaging in terms of teaching projects, because this robot will be very smart. We have some algorithms for it already. For example, it recognizes, oh, I forgot to say, he has a hand and eyes. So recognizes, and no connection. So it recognizes faces of people and welcomes them. It's like, say like, hi. Well, rather, hi, because there's only half of the hand.
So we were like, for students building specific skill sets, you say,
Well, not really. You have to be patient, and you have to be willing to go through a training provided by Design Lab on 3D printing. So we had filmmakers doing some parts. It's just that it's so much work, so much work. This is a project with CS, but we knew it will take forever, and it is already taking forever. It's like 6 months in print. So if people were interested and wanted to dedicate time, that would be great. So let's look at actual examples of projects, unless you have some questions so far. So this will be like the name of the lab, it will be a very varied project. It will be jumping from topic to topic because the group is so diverse and interdisciplinary. But some of them are really, I think, worth mentioning. So here is the first project which I'm kind of proud of. It was already published. This is a project where we use brain-computer interface. So brain-computer interfaces, who heard about them before? Do you know? No?
Say that again.
Brain-computer interface. So it's an idea of reading brainwaves and inferring from brainwaves some information which would allow you to interface with computer. And it's not reading the thoughts, it's reading brainwaves, which is different thing. It's activity of the brain. And these devices are usually very expensive. They can be, for example, the EEG or fMRI devices might be even hundreds of thousands of dollars. But there is also number of low-cost devices which can do that, but the quality of signal is very bad. So it cannot be like, normally these devices were used for control of robotic hand when you have no body control. For example, for people in locked-in state. That was the original research on brain-computer interfaces. But then some companies commercialized lower-cost devices like Emotive, it's one of the examples, which is $600, or NeuroSky, which is $100, and it gives you some data about the brain activity. The data is quite noisy, so you get 60–70% probability that what you're reading is true. Now, with that, you don't want to control a drone or a robotic head, but you can do a lot of things thanks to statistics with that. And one of the things you can do, which we did, is to modulate the difficulty of a learning task based on the focus level of the participants. So imagine that you are putting this brain-computer interface on a bunch of students, and depending on how focused they are, and in addition with information you're getting from the learning task, you modulate the next task. So people are staying in what we call a state of flow. So the idea is, it's a psychology idea which says that you should be engaged, challenged, not bored, but not over frustrated. So you have to be in between of being bored and frustrated, challenged, but not over challenged, right? And this is called the state of flow. If you can keep people in the state of flow, it's shown by previous research that they will learn better, that they will engage better, and games do that all the time. That's kind of the whole point of games, to keep you in the state of flow so you keep playing. So games have a lot of experience with that. So for that reason, we used a computer game. We designed a game which specifically teaches proportional reasoning. It's a task which should develop in children, which should be taught to children between ages 7 and 10, but sometimes they lack the ability to learn it by themselves, so they should be taught. And if they don't get taught, then they have problems with mathematics, especially with algebra, which leads to problems to get to universities and so on. So teaching proportional reasoning is known to be a serious problem. This specific project was actually done both for regular children and children with ADHD. We don't have results on ADHD yet, but we have some results in application of teaching children without the ADHD condition. So I just wanted to play this video for you. So you see, this is a game that this girl actually see that in VR. We are just showing it here. It's a game when you have to balance a bridge, and when you are balancing a bridge, you have to calculate in your head the proportions between weights of the blocks which you are putting on the bridge. We are using freehand interaction, so you don't have anything. You just hold in air. You hold these blocks. And that's done using the technology which we have. And then you place the block on the bridge, and if you do it correctly, then you won the level, you go to the next level. But what is really interesting about it is that depending on how you did in the first level, you will be either jumped to the next level, or you will stay on the same level of difficulty, or it even will go down in the difficulty, right? So we basically adapt the difficulty of the task to your skill level. And what we discovered is kind of a half-half result. So we did not, in this research, we did not improve, I don't know why, this is not even my bubble. So we did not improve the final results. So there was no significant difference in whoever was learned or not proportional reasoning, but there was a difference in speed. So children who were using this technology learned faster. We're semi-happy with this result, right? It's better to learn faster, but it would be better if they learned more also, right? If there was a significant result. But that's the result. We are suspecting that maybe the difficulty levels were not varied enough, or maybe there is no difference. But this is an example when we have some research results which were published. This was done actually with George Washington University. In a way, well, the student who did that was at the University of Waterloo, and now she's at George Washington University. Here is completely different project. So in the previous project, this was a typical educational game application of brain-computer interfaces in VR. And here is a project which I would call a social change project, or the idea of bringing more equity to education. And in this project, what we are trying to do is to create an environment which would allow people to participate in remote classes when they cannot participate in person. And what specifically inspired this project was the idea that students from all over the world could join, let's say, American University lecture by going to the VR version of that lecture while it is happening. So not a recording like many universities are already promoting, but something which is happening already. And they would maybe pay a small fee, or maybe it would be free, but the idea was that they could participate. Now, how would that be facilitated? So you can, of course, imagine having a professor in a volumetric studio, sending the hologram data and so on. That's very fancy, but that would be very impractical. We were thinking how to do that as practical as possible. And what we found was kind of obvious, that almost everybody in the world, even in developing countries, right now have a smartphone. It's actually surprising, but they do have a smartphone. The problem is data access. 70% of people have some kind of smartphone. The problem is that there is very slow data access. So even with smartphones, they cannot, for example, watch YouTube videos, which is quite shocking. Unless you travel, you might be surprised with it. So we were thinking, okay, well, is there any way we can do it over very small, very slow data connection, or even without data connection over the voice connection? And we came up with a system where in real time, the professor's lecture is turned into virtual reality representation only using the voice of professor. So you basically, the only thing I need here as a professor is to run an app which will record my voice and your voices as a class, and it will automatically turn me and you into avatars which are animated, which have face expressions, and are in VR. And now somebody can get into this VR system and participate. So that's one way. This way people could passively participate in ongoing lectures, and they will not see us because we are not sending videos. They will see our representations in VR. But there is another way. So what if the remote student who is in VR would like to ask questions? How do we show them? Well, again, everybody could have VR headsets. That would be expensive. But what we came up with is that we would present the representation of that remote student on the whiteboard or on the projection screen. So the student is presented as an avatar on the projection screen without sending any video. It's a representation. And we, the class, is presented in VR as avatars. So let me play you a very rough prototype video, which shows how it works. So Alicia is a remote student. She uses VR, and she sees a teacher in VR classroom who is here. Now Brandon is the teacher, and he sees her as an avatar on the whiteboard. So she's represented here. He's represented.
Equation as presented by Mackenzie.
she can now draw on the whiteboard, which she sees in VR, and this, what she's drawing, it's showing on our whiteboard, on our projector, interactive whiteboard, ideally, if there is one in classroom. So she's writing a famous Fitts law in human-computer interaction, and she made a mistake, so he can now correct her.
That's pretty close. Now let's take a look right here.
So the current state of this project is that you can, let me show us. So you can actually use it to a degree, but as you see, the avatar is very clunky, the gestures are not very good, so it's not really commercially usable. But the project which we are working on with Natalie Jarkovic is to animate this avatar much better through the use of machine learning. So we're basically training this avatar to be able to read the voice of a teacher and create meaningful gestures. This is unsolved problem in computer graphics, so it will be a big publication if we succeed. And we have a visiting scholar coming from Germany to help with that. So it's a very exciting computer science project site on the Ideas Lab. It's done with Bei also, I should mention her. So this is another example when you use it as a teleconference and a telepresence system, right? So one example is to use the content, a game, and teach something. The other one is to use it as a communication system. And we have some other examples of projects. Any questions so far on these projects? We can interrupt me anytime, because I have so many projects. I have 27 projects, so I can go forever. None of them are created. Yeah.
So if you were to teach online remotely with students, the students themselves would need the technology in order to engage in the situation.
Yes, but the technology they might have is a smartphone. That's it. So smartphone which you put into a, well, this is not obvious for everybody. I always assume everybody knows it, but it's not true. A smartphone can be turned into VR headset easily. The easiest way to do that is to use Google Cardboard, but that's kind of not ideal. There are more expensive, meaning $50 solutions, which make it much more comfortable. For example, Gear VR. It creates really high quality VR. Good, definitely good enough for this application. So they would need to have a smartphone, and they don't need to have a fast data connection, but they need to have some, for now, some data connection. Maybe we can do it over a voice. Yeah.
Let's finish for today.
So I created this computational theater, as we call it, because I was a theater director, but it's very unlikely that I would ever direct Hamlet. So that ain't gonna happen, so I had to create artificial actors who are willing to do that. But here we are combining AI technology with VR. This is actually very simple technology. We are using a keyword-based speech detection. So whenever I say action, the actor knows that that means that it has to play. When I say certain words, it is detected, and there is modulation in the, for example, performance. So if I say exaggerated, then he will make bigger movements. If I say more subtle, he will make smaller movements. So it's not really complicated. It's just a proof of concept, but it could be made into a complicated project.
So you're doing that, so you're creating, in this case, this person playing Hamlet. So in terms of using that, would then that be used in a theater class to say, here's how Hamlet should be done? And other students then look, watch, because you've created the movements and the words, and so now would that be then used in a class to say, here's how Hamlet should be done, and that's what you need to now mimic?
We actually have an even broader application, but it's not complete. So the idea would be to create a theater which other people could watch, but there would be real and artificial actors in it. And anybody, or maybe only actors, would be able to embody an actor, an AR actor at any moment. So there is like a play happening between artificial actors, and then suddenly you decide to be Hamlet. So you log in to that actor and take over. And then we wanted to do experiments whether we can pass so-called Turing test. You know about Turing test? So this is an idea whether we can differentiate between AI and human. And we were wondering if we do it in the context of a theater play, whether an actor who is embodying a real actor who is temporarily taking over artificial intelligence actor and then leaving him would create the impression of talking to a real person. If we would fool people into believing this is a real person, which would be passing the tuning test, which is, I think, a big award and also a big step toward AI. So that was more the context. If I can see it really being used as a training, maybe not necessarily for theater, but for many other things. There are some things which should be done in a certain way. Like it is actually, VR is used for training of specific tasks, especially when they are repeatable, or for example, complicated tasks for engineers when they have to access some part of machine in a specific way due to safety. This is a potential application for that, and it's very easy. We just change the context, the technology will stay the same. So here is another example. This is a game we are working on. So the game is basically an implementation of an ancient game called the Royal Game of Ur. This was one of the first board games. It's older than chess. It was played for a long time in ancient Mesopotamia. And recently it was found, well, not that recently, it was found in 1920s, but the rules for it were recently deciphered from cuneiform tablets. And you can now buy this game and play it. So we thought, okay, well, this would be an interesting way to engage audiences, young people into interest in history and archaeology. I actually studied archaeology for 2 years because I wanted to be Indiana Jones until I found out that it's not good to be Indiana Jones, and I won't be Indiana Jones if I finish archaeology. I will be cleaning a little stone for 3 hours. So basically, it's kind of also a project which is related to my background, but the idea here is that you find yourself in the tombs of Ur, which are one of the preserved tombs in today's Iraq, and you are playing against the game from that time, playing against Sargon of Akkad, which was the rulers of ancient Mesopotamia. And it's done in VR, so we're trying to make it very realistic. But what is interesting about it is that we have this system which allows us to quickly set up any kind of exhibition. So I'm working with a library right now to do exhibition for Bill Gentile. He's a professor here, and he's a very established and famous foreign correspondent. So he has a lot of artifacts and stories from different countries, and I want to put them into AR so people can actually enjoy them. Another project is more educational. Well, this is also educational, but this project is very specifically done for the perception classes by Art Shapiro. So what we basically were trying to do here is the following. There is a lot of perceptual illusions which which we know are happening from harmonics. People from music would know that very well, right? So you can create like dots traveling from left to right, but when you look at the group of dots, you will have some kind of illusion that it's a circle and so on. And this goes very deeply into the illusion research, how we perceive the world. But it's very little known how it works in 3D, because it's kind of difficult to create pictures of moving balls in real 3D. You can only do that on a flat screen. So Art approached me asking whether I could do that as a VR project, and we did that, and we immediately discovered super interesting things. So there's so many things I'm like really surprised. So basically what's happening here is that there is this little spheres traveling into the center and going out. That's the only thing which is happening. The sphere is traveling in and out, and depending on the frequencies of this traveling, we see various shapes, okay? So we get the illusion of shapes just from the same movement. Why this matters is that there is a very interesting relationship between these shapes and, for example, quantum physics. These shapes, as we discovered, look exactly like the energy levels of atom when the electrons are going to different energy levels. And that's very surprising. We don't know if it, like, if we already talked to physicists about it, and they say, like, this is amazing, but we don't know if it is like obvious. We will find out that this is obvious, or this will be something which is really interesting result in the particle wave duality. Because these are particles which are moving on the harmonic wave. So there is something interesting, at least educationally, maybe even as a research. And this is very simple. This is an example of a project which took me 2 days to do for another faculty, and he can use it very extensively in a class. So it is small but useful. This one I will skip because it's not really. This one is another educational project for physics done with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. You know that American University is very famous in gravitational waves research. Our professor here, Gregory Harry, was one of the people who were in the team of Nobel Prize in 2016. It was a big news 2 years ago. So gravitational waves. Anybody with technical background here? Who has physics background here? It's really cool. So you know about the reality, maybe you heard about the relativity theory, which says that time and space are influenced by gravity. They're not constant, right? So if you put something close to the black hole, the time delays, like it's slower. But it's very difficult to explain. Like, how do you explain to students that time space is not constant and it bends? And usually there is this terrible example shown when you have like a flat surface and you put a ball and this ball is going to the center, which makes everybody feel that this is the time and space is two-dimensional. In 3 dimensions, there is not a good analogy. So what we did, we built a 3-dimensional model of time-space as a lattice like this, and we calculate the bending of that space due to the gravity of Earth and Moon influences. And this animation for physicists, for physics students, make it immediately obvious what is happening. So it's very helpful as a tool to let people understand. Yeah, we don't see much, but you see that time-space is bending. Well, you should see that the time-space is bending when the Moon is traveling around the Sun. It's like stretching around the Earth. It's stretching the time-space fabric, right? So that's basically the idea. And then you can go into this. This is happening in VR, right? So you go into VR and you see that the 3-dimensional space and time is bending. You can go close to the black hole and see how much it bends and so on. So it's basically a visualization, but it's very, very useful for students. So this was done with San Luis Obispo, and hopefully will be promoted by LIGO project, which is the gravitational wave detector. So this LIGO project is really famous. Gregory Harry has 45,000 citations from just this project. So 45,000 is probably the highest American university in total. It's amazing. And this is the final thing I wanted to show you. As I am a filmmaker and all of this was very scientific. This is a project which I did with students in New York as an experiential learning. In this project, we create a film in 3 different versions. One of them is traditional film, the second one is 360, and the third one is the holographic film, a film where you can walk inside. Okay, so here I have to explain a little bit what you will see because it's really difficult to see it on a flat screen. So we created this film in 3 different versions with students as a team and with professionals as the second part of the team. And this forms an exhibition in VR in which you find yourself in a cinema and you see that film presented as a traditional film on a cinema screen in virtual world. But then what you can do is to go into the frame. So you cross the frame, you literally walk through the frame and find yourself in the world of this film. So this is an interesting experience because you're entering the frame and seeing what's the set and walking around the set. It's not yet completely finished, but you will see a little bit how it looks like. So this is shaky because this is in my head in VR. So I'm in cinema. I can see my hands. Well, we cannot see my hands, but you can. Like if there was, it was better. And then I will walk toward the frame.
We see your hands.
Yeah, barely, right? And then you can walk into the frame. So I will now start walking in a moment.
How strange.
So I'm basically walking into the frame. This is a close-up, so I'm walking into the face of the actress, and then I'm inside the film. So I can walk around now in this set. We have these holograms in black and white for now. We are still working on it. But you can see that there is a set, everything reconstructed from photogrammetry. And that's one of the ways to experience it. And it's synchronized, so you can get in and out, and the story continues. And another version we have is that it happens on a tabletop in AR. So you can look at it while it's happening and walk around the story this way.
First afternoon.
This is a story by Catherine Mansfield, like early feminist story from New Zealand from 1970. And I know it looks shaky, but this is because I'm walking around, right? So it's always like this when you show things from recorded from the headset. There is also ability, here we see my hands better, so you can become one of the actors, in this case Vera, and listen to a radio using in VR, using your hands to manipulate the dial. You can switch on and off different objects, and there is also a little game happening in this project. So it's we call it transmedia, but it's like multimedia experience. And the really nice thing about it was that students were participating in it, and it was 3 undergrads and 3 graduate students. The undergrads were actually the freshmen from my visual literacy class, and they absolutely loved the experience. We all went to New York and spent there 16 hours per day, 3 days of work, and everybody was happy about it. Unlike if I gave them a 16-hour assignment, right? Okay, so this is the last project I wanted to show you. If you are interested, there are many other projects on the Ideas Lab website. But let's, for the last 15 minutes, have a little discussion on whether you think these technologies can be used in your classes or in your research, whether there's something you're wondering if it's possible or have an idea. And if you don't have any ideas, then I also have a demo, so you can, if everybody will be quiet, I have a contingency plan.
So what kind of students are being attracted to what you're doing? Because I know you're in the School of Communications, but do you need coders, do you need computer science, and what are kind of the folks that are coming in the backgrounds that they have?
It's very, very background. So because Game Lab and now Ideas Lab is hosted as SOC, but it's interdisciplinary, we have students from everywhere. So the student you saw in the documentary was from Global Studies, I think, I don't even remember. We had a daughter, your daughter was playing one of the roles, right? She's from, well, she took my class in film, but she is not in film, right? She was.
She's a PR now.
PR, right? Exactly. So this is, and of course, students from film and from computer science are involved. I have a business student now, so there is engagement from the Cover School. So it really depends. The reason why it is so interdisciplinary also is because it was all volunteering. So basically, I told people, I will pay for your food and accommodation, but that's it. Do you want to work? Anyways, and people were very interested. So
IMDb credits.
Yes, IMDb, because she was an actress, right? So she got IMDb credit. Yeah. So yeah, it very much varies. Yeah. For me, it's as critical as visual or more. If you cannot get high quality visuals, then it's better to get high quality audio, and it has better perception, and immersion is higher. For this, it would be actually possible. I think Carl told me that someone, maybe not you, maybe it was Braxton, is working on modeling volumetrically the sound of different shapes. So not on the level of just this is made of brick and this is made of metal. He's actually recreating the RFEDs, something, I'm trying to remember the function, to transfer that feeling of being in a certain place of a certain acoustics in VR. So it's being done.
It's not only that, it would be, next step would be to get your hands on the gear, right?
Yeah, and there are virtual mixers.
To get your hands on like a virtual mixer, the mixer that the TGI 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the Dark Side of the Moon was created on. It'd be great for us to be able to get their hands on it.
Can you? So the question is, if you can do it in WISE, if you can get the quality of it in WISE and then binaural rendering of this, then you can do it in VR, right?
Yeah, we've been talking about WISE. So.
Yeah. Because it will just communicate. It will send the audio to the headphones. Oh yeah, so we are, I'm told we are out of time. The next presentation here is in 15 minutes, or there is a lunch break? Yeah, okay. So yeah, I promised you demo, so if anybody wants to stay and don't go to lunch break, I can show you the demo, or you can visit Ideas Lab. It's in DMTI building inside the Game Lab.